Welcome back to Highly Respected. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have another fantastic and incredible episode. So today we're going to begin with the cognitive elite, like always, or generally like always. And so as a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions and suggest guests and topics. And for the low price of less than $16 a month, you can join the Cognitive Elite at Highly Respected Substack. And that's at highly-respected.com. And if you don't really want to ask questions or suggest guests and topics, you can simply just sign up for the paywall podcast, both the mailbag and the IQ supplement that are posted every week for the regular subscription. And this is all at Highly Respected Substack, highly-respected.com. So we're going to first get into this. Today, our first question is from New England Refugee. He asks, France's Marine Le Pen found guilty in a embezzlement trial. What does the French right do now that she can't run in 27? Yeah, the case is really stupid. It's something that wouldn't even be a matter in America. Apparently, they were using funds that they were getting through the EU Parliament to pay National Rally staffers. And these guys were still working for the party. It's like stuff that in America is like normal. I don't find this as like really criminal. It's just simply that they're like, oh, there's supposed to be a separation between the two. I think it's just trumped up charges that they've done to bring down Le Pen. And she is banned from running for office in the next 5 years, which includes 2027, of course. And it's they also made clear that even on appeal, she would have this ban. So maybe she gets her appeal success before the 2027 race, but I doubt it. So it looks like she is not going to be able to run in France. So what does the French right do now? Well, it's likely that Jordan Bardella, I'm not using the French pronunciation, probably Jordan, I don't know how to, probably Jordan Bardella, who is technically the president of National Rally, would step into the role to run for president in 2027. He's not yet 30 yet. He's turning 30 this year, I believe. He will be old enough to run. I think you only have to be 30 or so to run in France for French president. He was potentially up to be prime minister last year, but of course the other parties made an alliance against National Rally and ensured he would not be it, so he could be it. From what I know from French nationalists, they think he's worse than Le Pen, or they're much more suspicious of him than Le Pen. I would say this about Bardella, is that he was supposed to speak at CPAC this year, but after Steve Bannon's alleged Roman salute, he fled the building and did not speak. And so that says a lot about him. Also, something with National Rally is that they're very anti-AfD. I know, like some German nationalists, they are not. Well, they don't really like the French, but that's another matter. They're not fond of National Rally and their leadership, and they don't really like Bardella, and that's it. He does have, he does have a certain level of popularity. I mean, he's very young. He's a upstanding guy. He could get votes that potentially Le Pen couldn't get herself. So maybe he could prove to be a more competitive candidate. But from what I'm told, he's more of a lightweight. There's even a lot more skepticism of him, whether he can be as strong as Le Pen. There's that. So that could be the candidate. And then there could be other candidates from the other parties. Right now, there's Bruno Retailleau, great French Retailleau, who is the interior minister in this coalition government under Macron. He's been really trying to tackle immigration. He's currently in a battle with Algeria over Algeria refusing to take migrants back, and he's building up a reputation on the right. He could turn out to be the center rights guy and get to the runoff. If he got to a runoff against who it's most likely, it doesn't seem like the center or center left are going to be proposing anyone. And it's likely going to be Mélenchon, who is the far left guy, will be a competitive candidate. And I mean, it's 2 years off, and also I'm an American. I don't know 100% of all these candidates and what may shape out to be. There could be a guy like Macron who was not really discussed much prior in like 2015 for the 2017 race, who came out of, who emerged as a strong candidate and then won the race. So there could always be that person. But for right now, Mélenchon is looking very strong. And for those who don't know, Mélenchon is essentially the France's Bernie Sanders, but even more resolutely left wing than Bernie Sanders is. And he's absolutely awful. He has openly endorsed the Great Replacement. He's like said, the Great Replacement, this is awesome. We want this in France. So that's how bad he is. It would be a nightmare scenario if he becomes president. So other people on the right who could merge if Bardella doesn't seem have what it takes. It is Retailleau from the center right, the Republicans, who could be the guy. He's considered likely to be the Republicans, which is the center right party. Their guy for president. I mean, somebody else might defeat him in their nominating battle, so it might not be him, but this could offer opportunity for the center right to put forward someone. There's also the chance that Marianne Marchal, who is Le Pen's niece, could emerge as the top right wing candidate. She's currently with Reconquest, which there was a tiff within Reconquest, because Reconquest is primarily Eric Zemmour's, who is famous political pundit commentator in France, who created the party because he felt National Rally was too weak on the identity issues, on the issues he cared about. And also he wasn't really down with their left-wing economics or more populist economics. He focused on creating that party. But in the last election, Marianne Marchal supported National Rally, and there was an agreement with Reconquest, but Zemmour was pushed aside. Marianne Marchal could emerge as the candidate of the right, coming from Reconquest, but it depends on who is the Reconquest candidate. Maybe, she could run independent. I don't know. It might be Zemmour, but this could be her opportunity to run. So there's probably those three people are going to emerge as the alternatives to Le Pen for the right. And Retailleau, who is even though he's from the center right party, he's considered part of the right wing faction of the center right party. He's trying to make a name for himself. Retailleau is trying to make a name for himself as being very strong on immigration and all the matters that concern the right. So it could be it. So it's more good that it's going to be an alternative right candidate of a different meaning of alternative right rather than Le Pen. So they do have other people on hand. Now, I don't speak French. I don't think many of these people, our listeners, do. I am not as familiar with France and who are the best candidates. So it is tough to say what it will be like in 2027, but they are alternative candidates, and some of them might be better. Marianne Marchal is better than her aunt. Bardella is considered worse than, or not as good. Worse is a little bit stronger term, but not as good as Marine Le Pen. And Retailleau is. You have to be more skeptical of the center right parties when they get into power. And I always say this is like a good litmus test in Europe is what is their opinion of Ukraine. If they're like diehard Ukraine supporters, that's generally creates red flags. And generally the center right Republicans are very extremely anti-Russia. So that's always a concerning matter. But I do have issues with, there are issues with Europe deciding to save itself. Because the fact is a lot of Europeans are simply content with how the status quo is. They're content with American military power providing them defense, and so they can spend more money on their welfare state. They're content with, they're very much frightened by any type of change. It's why, even though ending the Ukraine war is in their interest, that all of Europe is coming around to rally around Ukraine against JD Vance and Trump saying we're done with Ukraine. It's like, why are they that insistent on this? And that there is type of a mind cucked in Europe. And I always say this is like the difference between America and Europe. I think the difference is that a higher proportion of the population gets the issue more than I think in America, and their demographics are better. I say this, but at the same time, America is capable of being a serious power. Europe, at the moment, is not. And also, Americans, I think, are more open to doing things to correct the issues than Europe. Even though a lot of us are disappointed with, or some people are disappointed with Trump and what he's doing with his actions, I'm not really. I think he's doing as much as he can, and he's actually going pretty radical on some of these moves of like sending these guys to El Salvador and elsewhere, and really challenging, court orders and stuff, and trying to just bulldoze through it. Europe right now, like what's making Retailleau trying to build his reputation is the fact that they can't bully Algeria into accepting these migrants back. If this issue was happening in America, we would have bullied them long ago to accept the migrants. So it's like in Europe, they're much weaker, and I think a lot of their people are just content with the type of mediocre welfare state status they have. You call it mediocre. I mean, you could argue that Europeans have a higher quality of life than Americans do, and I think you can easily make this argument. They have walkable cities. They have less crime. Even though the crime is rising, but even the levels of crime that they have, they're worried about like Sweden, like being a gangland murder spree. Am I like, even the roughest neighborhoods would make, would seem like Mayberry to Baltimore. That's like something to keep in mind. It's like when Europeans like, oh, things are really bad, and they come to America, they like see Philadelphia, Baltimore, even the dangerous parts of Washington, D.C. They're like, oh my God, they're like, get us out of here. This is horrible. So they do have, they do make a lot less money than Americans do. And if you do have ambitions, Europe is not the place for you. It's a lot of their like very ambitious people who want to start businesses or do any type of innovation, leave Europe. They have that problem. But if you're, just content with working a 9-to-5 job, having lots of vacation, and, you don't really care about making that much money, it's a pretty nice place to live. Especially compared to some places in America. So, but I think a lot of them are just content with what the status quo is, and this is it. I mean, they do want less immigration. They certainly want immigration reduced, but whether they're willing to accept the radical upheaval to the status quo to do so remains to be seen. So 2027 is definitely a defining moment for Europe. Whether Europe will choose the right path, choose to upend the status quo to set itself on the right course, or will they choose the status quo, or even worse, choose something worse than the status quo by voting for Mélenchon. We will have to see what happens with France. This does change the matter. It's not completely over for the right, because there are candidates who can fill the void that Le Pen leaves. And it's not like Le Pen is the greatest politician there. I mean, the fact that she's thrown AfD under the bus over things, she is not is not our ideal candidate. Trump is a lot better than her. And so are some others. And I would also say the AfD are much better than her. But AfD doesn't have a real strong leader except for Bjorn Höcke, who is not even their main leader. So that is my thoughts on Le Pen getting banned. I don't think it is just shows how Europe doesn't have real democracy. In Germany, they're once again considering banning the AfD. And, Britain, they don't allow you to post anything on Facebook that could be anti-immigrant. They don't really have democracy. And even you look at what Romania is, like the leading presidential candidate who is seen as anti-status quo and too pro-Russia, they just arrested on BS charges. Like, they don't really have democracy in Europe. It's just simply they'll do anything to preserve the status quo that they have. And even if they unite to build an independent Europe, it may be like the most cringe Europe we can imagine. It's just like continental girl boss tyranny that could happen, which I don't think much of the American right would be a fan of. So that is my answer to his first question. He's got a second question, which we'll talk about briefly. He said, Candace Owens said RFK is, this is New England refugee, Candace Owens said RFK is possibly being blackmailed and had a whole unconvincing episode about it. This after she continued to accuse Macron's wife of being a man and having a serious about it. Has Candace gone full clown, or do you still consider her mostly a positive force? I mean, she's just giving what her audience wants, and the audience wants these conspiracy theories. The RFK being blackmailed, I don't even know what it is. They don't even have any evidence. It's just something, but it gets them traffic. You know, to say with the Macron's wife being a man is like, it is so hilarious what it is, but it creates a captivating narrative. The reason why people get into conspiracy theories is because it presents a narrative. Just presenting the facts of a matter is not a narrative. People want a narrative. They want a story. They want good and evil. They want plot twists. They want something to excite them. And that's why they get into conspiracy theories. People like stories. And they like a story that there's good and evil is, you know, doing all this subverting and plotting and anything. And this could be against RFK, that he's wanting to do good, but the evil forces are blackmailing him, and only the intrepid, you know, hobbits can save him of some sort. It's the same with like Macron's wife being a man. They didn't just leave it at Macron's wife being a man. It's actually his dad. You know, I think that's like the real plot twist. It's like, you know, it's like Darth Vader, like, oh, Emmanuel, I'm your father. You know, it's like, I don't know. It's what entertains the audience. This is what they give. I mean, she is, you know, she's needing eyeballs, and she goes with it. And she still talks about a lot of other topics that conservatives aren't, but it is mixed with complete clown show stuff. So it's certainly not my cup of tea. And I don't really like the insane clown party, but yeah. It's very clear. I mean, it was very clear with the Macron's wife. And I mean, most of the stuff, I mean, there is still positive stuff she could talk about, but it's mostly the clown show stuff. But that's what gets you an audience. And I think that's what keeps a lot of her audience there, even though she's going into forbidden territory, but she's able to go into forbidden territory when it's surrounded by a lot of clownishness. So that is the matter. I mean, most independent podcasters that are big on the right now are going into clownish territory. I mean, it's like Tucker, probably less so, but with Tucker goes into it. He still goes into very good. I think it's all, you know, it's more even low between clown stuff and serious stuff with Tucker, but they still all get into that. I mean, it's what the audience wants. And these guys, they do have to keep that audience there. And, highly respected doesn't have to do that. So I guess that's a benefit of being an independent thoughtfluencer, where you're able to just talk about whatever you want regardless. Well, I think the audience enjoys most of what I have to say. So there is that. I think we'll go next to not Arms Day. We'll go to Stealth Bomber. Stealth Bomber asks, recently the Democratic Party's approval rating dropped to an all-time low of 29%. In spite of this, the betting markets still give them roughly a 50-50 shot at taking back the White House in 2028. Why is the left so committed to upholding their noses and voting Democrat, despite this disdain for their own representation? I feel like if Republicans had numbers this low, the base would either vote third party or not vote at all. Additionally, what is the biggest factor driving this rating? Is it simply the insane wokeness of the past decade? I would have to disagree that Republicans this number would vote low. I mean, what third party are they going to vote for? The only thing that they would decide not to vote Republican is if they knife Trump in the back and they're so loyal to the man that they decide not to vote. There is a lot of loyalty to the personality of Trump of a significant number of Republican voters, where they're now dependent on those Trump only voters to come out and to turn out to vote. And whenever Trump's on the ballot, they do well. They did well in 2016. Obviously, they won, despite what all the analysts thought was going to happen. And 2020 was supposed to be a massacre. Still, it was a very close election, and some may say they even won. And then in 2024 was an incredible election, and also Trump did much better than Senate candidates. Now, the one thing to note is that the Republican House, in the House, Republicans ran a little bit ahead in the popular vote compared to Trump, but they still didn't do very well. And it's more due to gerrymandering in Democratic states and other things. But he still did. He ran ahead of Republican Senate candidates in battleground states, which is something that didn't happen in 2016. Generally, Republican candidates in battleground states ran ahead of Trump. In 2024, he ran ahead of them, which shows that they're now very much dependent on Trump getting out the vote. I mean, you can even see that 2022, one of the factors is that Trump was not on the ballot. And if he had been, that they would have done a lot better in that race. So I don't think that, having that level of disdain and vote holding their noses, I mean, that's just a normal part of American democracy where people hold their noses and vote for the lesser of two evils, or what they feel is the less bad option than the other party. So that's just normal, and Republicans do this as well. And there's no real third party option here. So I would have to disagree with that. Now, going to the matter of what the biggest factor driving this rating, it's just simply that they lost and they don't have any real leadership. They don't really have any platform to run on. It seems like they're just letting Trump walk all over them. And so it's not quite the insane wokeness. It's more the feeling that they're completely weak and offer no coherent message, no strong message, no strong leadership to rally their base behind them. And it's a big difference from what it was like in 2017. In 2017, Hillary Clinton had a lot more popularity and respect, even though she was not really pushing herself as a leader, even though Chelsea Clinton at this time, new media like The Hill and Politico were talking about how she's like a new star. They at least had people like that. They don't really have any stars besides AOC. Some people are saying Jasmine Crockett, lesser extent, but nothing like they had before. The Democrats had a lot of stars. There was a lot of rallying power to them. They were getting all these protests out there, and they were all implicitly pro-Democrat. They're not having that this time. And I think it's the base is demoralized. The party itself is demoralized. Party doesn't have leadership. Party doesn't have a message. They had a very clear message in 2017 of being anti-Trump. This time, they're not sure what their message is. Because some of them they don't want to return back to Trump derangement syndrome. They felt that hurt them politically in years past. So a lot of the leadership wants to just move on to something else. What that thing to move on to, they haven't figured out. And there are those like AOC and Jasmine Crockett and others who want to bring back that hard anti-Trump message that they had in 2017, mixed in with populist economics. But the party hasn't really solidified about this. And most of the, resistance these protests going on at Tesla dealerships, it's not really that tied to the Democratic Party in the way that the Women's March and all these other protests were tied in with the Democratic Party in the Trump era. Even the Parkland stuff was full on Democratic op. But the Tesla stuff just seems like it's organized by random, deranged libtards. And it's, it is a popular phenomenon in America, but it's also like, no one really takes it as seriously as I think, besides Elon, as the Women's March and a lot of these protests that were going on in 2017. And there's even stuff that is like not generating mass protests, like what Trump's doing with like his plans for, the mass protests that broke out over his alleged Muslim ban at the beginning of his administration. They're about to do a more hardcore travel ban this time. And they're also picking up all these like university students who've been protesting Israel. And it's not really generating mass protests. So it's the left is demoralized. Democrats don't offer a real strong message. They don't have leadership. And a lot of people, just like they don't feel well represented by Democrats. Now, on them, we're 50-50 shot at taking back the White House. It's 3 years away. We don't know what the hell's going to happen in 2028. Now, in 2026, if they told 50-50, they'll probably take back the House in 2026. I mean, that's generally how midterms work. The party in power generally doesn't do well in midterms. I think Republicans will keep the Senate, but they'll probably lose the House. I mean, their majority in the House is already extremely small. So, I mean, the reason why they kept Elise Stefanik there is that, one, they already have a very tiny minority or tiny majority in the House, and also they're afraid that they'll lose that seat because Democrats are actually, in the past, this is a sidetrack. They've always complained about gerrymandering as what Republican racists are doing, but Democrats have mastered it in a way that Republicans wish they could do, and their generally courts are more in favor of Democratic gerrymandering than Republican gerrymandering, and they've done so much ridiculous stuff to prevent Republicans from having seats that they should have in many blue states, and there's fears that they're going to gerrymander her seat or that they're going to figure out a way to, her seat is much more competitive than they thought. So there's that. But I think it's too early to say, way too early to say what 2028 is going to look like. So we've got that. We're going to go to a new member of the Cognitive Elite with Gillis Enjoyer. He's got an incredible comment to say first. He says, more of a comment than a question, but I'd like to thank you for 2 years of very clear and no BS political commentary. I think listening to you kept me level-headed through the election cycle and has really sharpened my own political instincts. I'm semi-serious here, but I think Richard Hanania was right when he said you are a normal conservative, hope bring others back to reality. I don't know if I would say I'm a normal conservative, but I'm a pro-reality conservative, pro-reality right-winger. I do not like fantasies and LARPing. So we'll go to his second question. Post 2022 midterms, I was extremely black-pilled about our chances in 2024, and I think you and many others agreed. I recall even into the fall of 2023, you said Biden was going to win. I didn't say Biden was going to win into the fall of 2023. What I was saying in fall of 2023 is due to Trump's legal issues is that it was presenting a major problem. Now in fall of 2023, I'll get into this because people always say, I was right about the election and I was right about a lot of other things, but I always get these people like, you thought Trump was going to lose. And then it's like, when? And they're like, you said this post J6. And I was like, every single person on earth thought Trump was done politically. And it's like, looking at them, it looks like he's going straight to jail. Everyone kind of nitpicks my, takes when, all throughout 2024, I'm saying Trump's going to win first off, I always said Trump was going to win the primary, unless for some reason he's put in jail, which never happened. And then, anyway, I'll get into this with the rest of the question. What do you think was the exact inflection point in which the tide began to shift in favor of the right? I've seen some people say it was a Bud Light boycott, but I think that was a very online phenomenon. I think that point was October 7th, and the way the left reacted nationwide and across the West really gave the sense that the world was on fire under Biden's watch, and also seeing jihadis wreak chaos and violence in universities enough to start detoxifying Trump and giving us the win. My thoughts. No, I would not say it was October 7th. I don't think that had much of an impact. And even when you look at Jewish votes, it's, it did get some billionaires like Bill Ackman to move to the right or move to Trump. But I don't think that was the main factor because, one, a lot of the podcasts that made Trump, that normalized Trump, a lot of these bro podcasts like Theo Von and elsewhere, they're all pretty anti-Israel and very critical of the conflict. And they got radicalized, or I don't know if radicalized, but pushed into a different direction on that. And they still supported Trump and helped normalize him. So I don't think October 7th wasn't it. Now with Trump on what made him not, I think it was more just the shrugging at his charges. Bud Light boycott was important because it was showing that peak woke had hit a snag, that they did finally have to worry about right-wing consumer-based or conservative consumers, and they couldn't just piss in their face, that they had to actually, accommodate them, and they were able to deploy these people to punish corporations. And corporations began to tone it down and realizing that peak woke is over. And also in 2023, Try That in a Small Town, Jason Aldean, the Rich Men North Richmond song, which is cringe in its own right. All these country songs that are anti-woke of a way and right-coded. I mean, Try That in a Small Town is obviously very right-coded. Became chart toppers on the Billboard charts. That happened summer 2023. And it was just a build-up. And I think it's also the fact that everyone just shrugged at Trump getting charges. And when I was saying the fall of 2023, no. Biden, what I always thought the problem was if Trump is convicted of the more serious charges, like what was relating to January 6th, and even with the document stuff, but mostly January 6th, that would hurt him in the general election. It would also potentially prevent him from campaigning, and it would make it more difficult for him to win. I always said that he had a chance to win, though, and I always said he was going to win the primary if he stays in. It was just a matter of him staying in, and he always stayed in with that. But it's more of just how people are shrugging off his charges. And when I realized that they were pushing his trials back, and it looked like he was not going to have any of his trials in 2024, except for the least serious one of Stormy Daniels, which I always thought that wasn't really going to affect him much. And the fact that nations shrug it off, that they're just moving forward. And I think it's more the Bud Light thing. I got that wrong when it was there because I had seen several attempts to boycott stuff. I had seen attempts to boycott NFL. And then I remember in 2022 that pretty much every conservative felt it was you were duty bound as an American to watch the NFL. And even though the NFL became woker post Floyd. And I just felt that I had seen so many boycott attempts over my time in politics that this would be no different. But it turned out to be very different. And I think it did send a cultural message that the country is moving beyond the peak wokeness. I mean, wokeness is still very much embedded in our country, but there was a level discussed and backlash reached with that, and the country began to change from peak woke. And then Trump was normalizing these podcasts and other things, and so Trump was detoxified. I don't think October 7th really played much of a role in the election, to be honest, except for blackpilling Muslims from supporting Democrats. I think at some of the margins, which weirdly enough is that both the hardcore pro-Palestinians and the hardcore pro-Israelis helped Trump win, and that they were both alienated from the Democratic Party. I think that played somewhat of a role in the election. But I think it's the general pushback against wokeness, the general detoxification of Trump, and how the country just didn't care about Trump's charges or felt that they were politically motivated in an element of political persecution. And that's why they moved on from that. I told him I would, since he's a new guy, I will answer his other questions. I do say limits are 2 for the normal podcast and 4 for the Cotton Fleet, but his first was just a comment, so I'll go ahead and answer his other 2 questions. He says, third question is, the 2020 riots were extremely foundational in shaping my ideological view. I think it was the most blackpilling time to be a right-winger in America, because it was just a look into how bad things can get into the future. It was such a seismic shift in the politics of the country, but I feel like no one talks about it anymore. Why do you think this is? Is that it just makes most people uncomfortable to think about, and they're not ready to grapple with what it meant when left-wing and magical mobs were pulling people out of cars and kicking them in the street? Yeah, I think it's just that 2020 people don't want to relitigate it. Most people had the wrong opinions on 2020, or not just both, on COVID, on Floyd, and Black Lives Matter, because 2/3 of the country backed Black Lives Matter, and a lot of conservatives were posting black squares and standing with Black Lives Matter. There's even a lot of Trump supporters who are claiming Black Lives Matter are based, and it's white Antifa that are causing all the troubles, like Black Lives Matter are pro-Trump. but it's Antifa that's it. There's a lot of even Trump influencers who I'll not name who are trying to run with this line. And it's just extremely blackpilling in how our country looked at that time. And a lot of people want to white pill and be optimistic and not focus on dark times. And pretty much as the country as a whole, they all want to forget 2020. There is this article, the National Review, published by a guy, Esoteric CD Enjoyer is his handle. I forget his, I forget his, I forget his real name. But anyway, he wrote something for National Review earlier in March about how angry COVID makes because he has a kid with some type of disability, and he was in Chicago, and they were basically limited in what he could do and interact with. And he was, playgrounds were shut off and all the things, and it had a very negative impact on his child. And it's such a aggravating moment, even though this guy was pro lockdowns, was even well into later into 2020, and a huge vax head. This guy, looking back, it makes him very angry and very uncomfortable. And his own opinions were wrong at that time. And I think it's the same with Black Lives Matter, is that Republicans don't want people to remember what they were saying about George Floyd and the riots at the time, which many of them were supporting the protests, the peaceful ones, and saying that the George Floyd death is the worst thing ever. Now, there's growing support for pardoning Derek Chauvin. So I think it's just that people don't want to look back at how they got it completely wrong. And it also is just very blackpilling about the country to think about 2020. And it's just also it's also people's lives sucked at that time. They were stuck, they were locked in their homes. A lot of people were going crazy. It's why we had the riots in the first place, as people were going crazy at home, and they couldn't deal with being locked away and having no sports on, no entertainment, no going out, and people just don't want to think about it. Generally when bad things happen in people's lives, they don't want to dwell on it. And I think for America, we have PTSD from 2020, and we don't want to sit down on the couch and discuss it, especially when many of these people got it completely wrong. So it did radicalize a lot of people on the right. If you want to say one of the things that made the right better from what it was in the 2010s, it's 2020 and 2021. I think a lot of conservatives were, down with the lockdowns and a lot of the COVID insanity and even BLM. But once they saw all this stuff and all the nonsense, and also they saw was the insane stuff that was being pushed by their kids' schools, it really red-pilled and radicalized a lot of conservatives and a lot of Americans, and it made it more possible for Trump to win in 2024. So that's my question. Now, for his last question, more lighthearted question. Do you think right-wing America will stop hating soccer so much? My personal view is that an extremely entertaining sport to watch. And when you look at it from a political and cultural standpoint, it's much less magical than football or basketball. Not to mention many European teams have very right-wing fan bases. Does it make me a bad right-winger if I think conservatives should actually prefer it into our very woke domestic leagues? Well, MLS has the most left-wing professional sport in America. All their ultras are first off lame, they're Redditors, and they're all extremely left-wing. They all have we stand with trans rights and Antifa symbols. So any person who's really into MLS is a leftist in America. So, and it's asking too much for right-wingers to really care about foreign teams that are across the ocean. They're not going to be that only. It's really more of a liberal thing, even though I know there's a lot of right-wingers who get into the European teams, but it is left-coded to be really into Manchester United, really be into, Real Madrid or Barcelona, even though I know Real Madrid has a right-wing reputation. There is that, it does, because you're essentially adopting something foreign and exotic in a way to look different from other Americans. Yes, it's less magical, and I think if you're in Europe, it's very right-wing to be into soccer. But in America, it's not. And we recognize this as a foreign import that is mainly beloved by the left. And we can see that with the type of fan base that's into MLS, which is the most left wing sport fan base in of any. Like NBA probably has more right wing fan. Well, they're just black, so they're that. But like NBA fans are not going to have like a giant trans flag to say we stand with trans. Well, MLS fans do. So I think right wingers are always going to hate that for a reason, even though I think a lot of online right wingers, due to the fact that they're into Europe and exotic things and foreign things, that they're going to get into, European soccer. And I would say that European soccer is pretty right wing, but we're not European. And so in an American context, it comes off as liberal and left coded. Thus, it's right to hate soccer. I don't think it's that bad of a sport to watch. I much prefer football. But if you ever meet people who are really into soccer, they're generally very liberal. I know there's exceptions. I'm not attacking Gillis and Joyer. I know there are exceptions, but so right wing Americans are always going to hate soccer. I generally think this is a good thing because I don't like the soccer fandom, especially when it comes to MLS fans. So that is my answer to that. So we'll go to Maverick. Maverick asks, Twitter has devolved into a slop with AI content and Indians engagement farming for Elon bucks. What should be done about this? Only 50% of India has the internet, so this could get much worse in the future. Well, it's hard to expect the online platforms that see a new customer base from eliminating it. But I think with Twitter, you have to, I think it's right to now put where the country of origin in people's bios. Where they're posting from. This would solve so many problems. There would be so many content farmers losing their audience if we saw that they're in India, Singapore, or Thailand, wherever the hell they are. And that would do a lot to help, curb the worst offenders. If we could point out like, oh, this guy who claims he's a base right-wing American nationalist is tweeting from fucking Pakistan, then that person would get a lot less audience. And I think it's also they have to change how the algorithm works. Is that Indians are currently gaming the system by getting verified accounts to all reply to them, and then they make more money. There needs to be a better algorithm which just simply says who gets the most authentic engagement from real life people, not bots, could make it a lot better. And it also... So those are the two things. I think it's like one, forcing Twitter accounts, which it would just be in their bio, location. It would list location. Now, not specific location, just country. Just be USA, Britain, India. Put that in the bio. Second is that they need to change the algorithm because, of course, Indians figured out how to game and scam it. And the algorithm right now rewards complete slop and idiotic content. And if they made it to where you're getting not so much verified engagement, but just real life humans, not bots, it'd be better about tracking the bots. I think it would improve the content. We have another guy had a similar question. Is Preston. He had it's his second question. I'll go to his other question later. He said, what do you think about the dead internet theory? The theory that the internet is being taken over by bots and overall social media decline as more third worlds get internet access. Can anything be done about this? There should be more work done to segregate the internet. It's the same with that. I think it's that when it comes to social media, they do need to be anti-bot. I mean, the funniest thing when Elon took over, it's like, we're going after the bots. Like, because he, when he was in his negotiations with Twitter, he's like, there's too many bots here. That's all bots. Now, like, the site is taken over by bots. It's like the world envisioned by Terminator. It's all the robots taking over. I think it's just a matter that you need to figure out how the system, have a better algorithm, force people to put their country of origin in their bio. And I think that would do a lot to help with with the decline in social media. But some of it's just a natural result. I mean, it's more dumb third worlds get on and they fall for these like silly AI videos like, wow, that giant shark really ate the aircraft carrier. I think some of it's just an inherent result or a natural result of third worlds finally getting internet access, which is really a nightmarish. But we can improve it through better algorithm. In some ways, it might be better, even though it would probably impact me. It would certainly hurt a lot of influencers. They're definitely not going to do this because Elon would lose every single influencer if he did this. But it probably would be better if they stopped doing the payouts. I think you would have a much better Twitter experience if they stopped doing the payouts. I mean, I wouldn't be hurt that much. But it would make for better content. People would be less dedicated to slop and AI nonsense and other things. It would make it for better. But Elon's not going to do that because the influencers would revolt. As everyone with a sizable account benefits to a degree. I mean, I benefit to a degree, not as much as others. It's not going to be that much of harm. I would probably, well, if I got free Twitter Premium as a way to accommodate the not getting payouts, I'd probably be fine with it. I'd personally trade it in to have a better Twitter experience, but we're probably not going to get that. So I do think that there's a lot of truth to the dead internet theory, but more and more people are online, and it's just getting dumber. And Twitter is not as much fun as it used to be. I don't post as much just because it's harder to find content to react to. It's because it's just like slop, and it's just like dumb stuff, and I don't know what to say. So that's it. His first question, I was wondering if you saw that ridiculous viral morning routine from that black influencer where he dunks his face in ice water and wakes up at 3 a.m. It made me wonder if a lot of this hustle, grindset, influencer culture is part of the reason why many Gen Z males, especially non-whites, are less radically left-wing than millennials. Is this also maybe getting in the way of some young white men being radicalized to the right? Is this a fad that will die soon as the economy changes and will have an effect on our politics? Also, for fun, what is the Scott Greer morning routine? There's not much morning routine. I get up, I read, and have tea. That's basically it. It's not our coffee, so that's the Scott Greer morning routine. Not that interesting. Is it a fad? No, it's probably going to be around a lot, but I do think it is true that this is stuff. The grindset stuff is getting a lot of non-whites not to be down for the left, because instead of turning to socialism, they all think that they can become millionaires. And it is kind of a part of the American dream, is that I wrote about this in my article on Andrew Tate from 2 years ago, where I said it's like he's the future of the multiracial working class, and it's really not these guys unionizing to advocate for socialism or wealth redistribution. It's more of them all trying to adopt a grind set and ostentatious displays of wealth and type of rapper mindset. If you look at rap music, they're all like big believers in capitalism and getting conspicuous consumption. Acquisitive individualism is something very key to this, as a term that they use in academia. So I think this does appeal to a lot of non-whites, and this has always been a problem for the left. The left, even in the 19th century and early 20th century, they're always like, oh, it's having even trouble organizing these workers and believing socialism, because they all believe in the American dream, and they all think that they can get their, they can rise up and become wealthy too. And the grind set is a way to appeal to non-whites to say, hey, you shouldn't be into socialism. Taxes are going to prevent you from becoming a millionaire. And you need to have this grind set instead of organizing a new union. So I think it does make them less radically left-wing. And also, it's inherently masculine, which they see the left as inherently feminine, is that wanting to longhouse them and tell them what to do and to essentially neuter them. So those are the two things, is like the intense longhouse nature of the left and the desire to make it big in America make them less left wing than you would otherwise think. Now, this could change. If the economy crumbles and all the grind set turns out to be bullshit, they could easily organize to demand radical wealth redistribution. And I think this is very still likely possible. And that would help AOC and others. This would be the American Chauvinism I've been predicting. But on the other part, I don't think it's getting in the way of young white men being radicalized, because otherwise they would just be left with leftists if they didn't have like Andrew Tate and some of these other guys. And if you look at what the bro podcasters are, is that they're presenting ideas that these guys would never otherwise hear about if they had just stuck to ESPN or whatever. They would never hear about, Great Replacement or Israeli influence on American politics if it wasn't for the bro podcasters. And so a lot of these guys, even though they might be into grindset and offering, dubious tracks to achieving wealth, they're at the same time offering a lot of red pills that these guys would otherwise not be hearing about. So I would say it's not preventing the radicalization of young white men. Anything, it's making them more right wing than what they would been watching and consuming, 10 or 20 years ago. So I'll go to Hornet. Hornet's got 2 questions. Thoughts on Jackson Hinkle becoming Prince of the Yemeni people? What do you think his end goal is? I also had no idea it was only 25. I think it's really funny content. He's like the Muad'Dib. It's like dude, Messiah. It's like he's there, and he's like there are all these tens of thousands of people are chanting for Jackson Hinkle. He's in like Arab garb, and you're like, what world are we living in? I thought it was really funny. I don't think this isn't going to end well for him. I just have to say is that meeting and greeting and becoming pro-Houthi when we're bombing the Houthis, not going to say that's good for your future to piss off the empire that much, but it is really funny content, so I have to give him props for that. But that's basically it. I think it's hilarious content. It's so absurd. No one would have ever thought this. So I think it's definitely a KOL moment, kicking out loud moment. 2, I'm getting married this week, but I promise not to become a wife guy. So my question is, what is worse, wife guys or girl dads? They're both kind of the same thing. Oh, first off, congratulations. We fully support our audience getting married and having kids, even though some people accuse me of not being that. They say that everyone needs to be a bachelor and a blogger for some reason. I always have people attack me for this, even though I've never recommended that. So congrats to you. They're both the same. In that it's just that girl dads are probably more of a social problem, but they are really same because they both become slaves to the women in their life. And a thing I want to say is that for a lot of what the marriage ideal that even conservatives offer, it's not that you become a paterfamilias, it's that you just become a slave to the women in your household, whether they're your daughters or your wives. And both wife guy and girl dad implies you being a slave to a woman. In a way that you're not the leader, you're not the authority figure, you're not the one that the women turn to for leadership. You're instead just, yes, dear, and you're following them around. Wife guys in a bit has always been a thing, but girl dads, it's a more newer phenomenon, and it's really it's promoting a lot of the girl power in sports. The girl power in business. The girl dads are really responsible for feeding into a lot of the delusions of these young women about what their life should be, and how that instead of having a dad providing serious advice to them, it's instead like, yes, honey, that's a great idea, and then just being a pay pig for all their daughter's worst decisions. Well, wife guys, a guy who's like, the old ball and chain's calling me home and all this stuff. That's been a natural thing for a while. It's more something you need to avoid, but I think the girl dad element, where there's not that authority element. There's always been, fathers have always had a special relation with their daughters, but the element where it's not so much that the father is the authority. It's more that he's a slave to the daughter. I think that's a new phenomenon, and that's been more disastrous for our society. So that's my thoughts on that. But anyway, to reiterate, congratulations. We are excited for your next step in life. So we are going to go to Werner. Werner, I might have had a... Yeah, he had a question from last week that for some reason I didn't get around to it. But he said, I'll answer this. Why do you think Blue America is more demographically homogenous than Red America? Or is the level of diversity and racial heterogeneity spread out all throughout the country? Red counties now include Rio Grande Valley counties that flipped for Trump and basically 100% counties that voted for Harris in northern Minnesota. Oh, I think the reason why is that if you have the absence of blacks, it generally makes your area more libtarded. If you look at New England, they've never really had blacks there. And they've never really had many minorities there. They now are getting immigrants, but they're so just inherently lib, and also the areas are, well, outside of a few cities, like Hartford, Connecticut, and some of these, New Haven aren't so nice, but there's a few other areas that are, rougher. But most of New England is very nice, and there's not the really presence of blacks, and it's somebody else's problem that then they have this outsider's view. It's like, how dare they treat these people like that? I watched this movie and they're so nice and smart and articulate. And so without the presence of blacks, generally a lot of white Americans become very lib. Now, this is not the case for the Mountain West and some of the Great Plains states, but it is very true for for Minnesota and New England. Is that the lack of presence of blacks generally makes them more liberal. And you can see that because when you have the presence of minorities, generally creates a competition or a realization of what's at stake. And also you see that your government policies are not, welfare and other big government policies are not benefiting you. They're benefiting the others, that you become more right-wing and conservative. And you also become much more concerned about crime, public order, and safety, which New England and New Minnesota don't have to care about. So I would say it's just a matter of that. But even though with the Mountain West and other, I think it's that they just have a more individualistic culture. They really don't like the government, big government, and they like low taxes, and they just want to be left alone. And I think that mentality makes them more conservative, even if they don't have the presence of minorities, which, Minnesota doesn't. But I think with Minnesota, the more Scandinavian German settlement and kind of the more community focus, and also the fact that they feel that all these policies benefit people like them, and it's the same in New England, that they become more liberal, and they also aren't faced with these racial realities that the South is. So that would be my my general take on that. So I'm really violating my only two questions, but some of these are very short questions. But he's got two more. He said I have to answer his other question because I didn't get to that last week. He said, "How do you think America should expand American influence in places that are currently dominated or being pulled away by China? I think the recent Houthi strikes prove that if America continues to be America's guardian of free trade, this could allow more countries to come back under our influence. Difficult to walk a fine line between neocon interventionism and America exerting its interest on the world stage." I think the best way to expand American influence is to not try to demand that they become democratic or woke. Is that we're not demanding that they respect gay rights. We're not demanding that they have elections like ours. We just allow them to be. And a reason why China is gaining so much influence is that they do not interfere in their domestic affairs. They're like, we don't give a shit about what you're doing with gays. We don't give a shit if you're a democracy. We just care about you allowing us to, invest and be our ally. And that's all that China cares about. And I think to counter that, we have to stop with this human rights agenda and, spreading liberal democracy throughout the world and wanting every country to be like America. That's the best way to counter Chinese influence, in my opinion. And it's not going to be neoconservatism because we're not trying to remake the world into America. His third question, you mentioned that you like playing Max Payne. Did you ever get to the third Max Payne, or is it just us in your opinion? I never played the third Max Payne. I think that was released when I was stopped being a video gamer. Gamer. I think that was released in like the early 2010s. You guys can correct me on that, but I played the hell out of the first two Max Paynes. So I never played the third Max Payne. So that is my answer to him. We'll go to Luke. His first question: why are so many far right people gay? What is the deal with gay Nazis? Well, I think it's just people in politics are very gay. I think it's generally, I have to say, is I always say this, is like generally if you're like a normal Chad with everything going well in your life, you're probably not going to get that into politics until you're like married and now these issues are affecting you and you have a family. Generally, young people don't get into that, but like with gays, they're clearly not normal, and they're different, obviously. So they're more inclined to get into politics, whether it's left wing or right wing politics, and they typically have a higher IQ, particularly higher verbal IQ, and be more into these. I don't know if what you would say intellectual topics are this, and also they're not as keen on the normal things in life because they're gay. They're like standard path in life, so they're going to be more open to these ideas. I think when it comes with far right, like if they're getting into Nazis, is that a lot of these people have serious problems, and then they try to deal with these problems through extremist politics, and that's why there's so many. Despite all the anti-gay rhetoric, there turns out to be a lot of gays here because it's either whether it's mental illness, substance abuse, problems at home, growing up in a single mom home or something else, that they've had a lot of problems and that they turn to extremist politics as their type of therapy. And I think with a lot of guys who are in the closet, this becomes an outlet for that tension and the problems that they have. And so that they become a part of it. But I mean, they're disproportionately represented in pretty much every political faction that you can imagine. It's just that it makes it weird for the far right because the far right isn't very pro-gay, to say the least. So there's that. That's the general line I would have, is that they're just drawn into this. Now with the Nazis, it's also that some of them have weird. They're drawn into the aesthetics and they have weird fantasies dealing with that, and so that's also drives some of them. But I think the bigger picture is that a lot of these guys have serious problems and they turn to extremist politics as an outlet for it. What's a Greer dream team band? Like, who do you think would be the best on drums and guitars? I don't like thinking that way of bands because generally I'm not that into like, oh, this guy's the best drummer ever, this guy is the best guitarist ever. I don't like thinking the way the music of like that. I just like to think of like who is the best songwriters and what is the most coherent music to create and best expression. And generally, if you had the best of everything, like the best drummer, best guitarist, best bassist, best vocalist, it would probably not be that great of a band because there'd be so many competing egos and directions that they want to go in, and they would just resolve on making generic music of some sort. And most like dream team bands or super bands are generally not that good. Bands are better when there's one or two people who are the authority, the leadership, and then they direct the bands. And generally those one or two guys, they either have this artistic conflict that creates great music, or they're on the same page and they're able to create a shared vision for a band that goes in the right direction. So I don't really like to think about that in that way. We have another similar music question that I'll bring up next. And then his third question is, should the White House be posting Studio Ghibli edits of immigrants being deported, or is that a bad look? The base seems to really like it, but what about the public? I don't think it really matters. I think we're kind of in a post getting upset about this stuff. And I even was looking up news articles. There wasn't as much media coverage of it. I was trying to check CNN and other things. I mean, they may have shown it on their tracker, but when I was Google searching to see like who's covering this, it wasn't that getting that much coverage. It was mostly something restricted to online. I don't think it really is a big hit with the bass because the bass. The thing about you have to remember is that most of our bass is not online like the distant right, the online right. They do get this content, but then they're gonna look at this stuff and they're like, I don't really get it. It's the same with like that ASMR deportation video. I think a lot of the like Gen Xers and Boomers are like scratching their head. They're like, I don't really get this. I mean, they're not offended, but they're not really getting into this. The people who are most getting into this. Some people say it's like this is a big hit among Zoomers. No, it's a big hit among people on Twitter, right-wing Twitter, which is if you guys noticed last week in my article, it's mostly disaffected 35-year-old or 33-year-olds, not so much, 20-year-olds. And they're really into it. So, but I don't think it's that important. We're past, it's not like it was in the first term. They can get away with this stuff. It pleases people online. People are like, this is a bad look. This is really cruel. I just think it's fine. I think the only problem I would have with it is I think a lot of base would probably scratch their heads. But maybe if you explained it, they're like, hell yeah, get that migrant out of here. They like the fact that they're celebrating, they're into mass deportations. It also, if you create these glib, humorous way of depicting deportation, it normalizes it for people. Because otherwise, like people are like, oh, these sob stories is like, oh no, look at what's happening to these poor illegal immigrants being deported. But if you create like a cartoon about it to laugh at them, it normalizes it among ordinary Americans to where they'll come to support it, and they won't feel so bad about these poor little migrants that the media wants them to care about. So the other music question comes from Dave. Dave asks, top 5 metal bassists, and he gives 5 listing, and it's an exact list. 1, Geezer Butler. 2, Cliff Burton. 3, Steve Harris. 4, Lemmy. And 5, Varg, which I don't know if I would include, but he says any disputes. Those 4 I would probably say are the 4 best. Like I said, I'm not that into technical ability like a lot of other people. I mean, I played bass in high school, but I never got like extremely good at it. So I was never really that into technical ability. And I don't really like to look at music as like, these are the 5 best guitarists. These are the 5 best drummers. These are these guys and other things. And I would say that probably the list, I would mostly put Steve Harris above, because he was the driving force of Iron Maiden and he was a very good songwriter. So for that, I would give him that. Varg, I mean, he did play bass on the Burzum albums, but he was for black metal and death metal, which is primarily listen to, the bass does not play that important of a role. I think with his main bass work is on, that people think of him as on Mayhem's Die Mysterious Dom Satanas. And in that, the bass work is pretty good for a black metal album, or at least it's something you can hear and it's interesting. I think it's a fine list. I would probably not really dispute it, but I'm just not that into technical ability for artists. And even with bass work, I prefer more the stuff that's in like post-punk and goth, the like pick, the kind of moody, bass playing that you hear in like Joy Division and The Cure, more than in some of the type of traditional rock bass playing and in some of the like old traditional heavy metal. So that's just some of my thoughts on bassists. But I would probably say that's a pretty good list, even though I'd probably just say the 4 top bassists, and I would probably agree with that. Heavy metal hasn't really been the genre for bass playing. So, but that's a pretty good list if you want to compile the best, so to speak. Okay, we still got a lot of questions. So, I'll go with Jersey Guy. Jersey Guy, he's got two. Here's my first question for this week from, he said, in your recent IQ supplement, you mentioned that John McCain was known throughout Washington about as being a complete jerk to just about everyone, other than the media, even to his GOP colleagues. What specific stories have you heard? Also, what other politicians recently retired and current are known for being jerks behind closed doors? I mean, most of them. All the women are jerks behind closed doors, like Amy Klobuchar, Nancy Mace. There are all the black ones like Sheila Jackson Lee. There was the one who died last year. His name is escaping me right now. Who was Sheila Jackson Lee was one who died last year. I was getting her confused with Maxine Waters. Pretty much all the black congresswomen, all the women are complete jerks and just completely horrible to their staff, and they have high turnover. I've heard that even the same about the Ukrainian Republican. Oh, Sparts, I think. Hold on, I'm having to get her name. Victoria Sparts, I hear very bad things about her. So it's mostly the women. But with John McCain, he's just like an asshole to his colleagues. He's an asshole to his wife. You know, he called his wife like a trollop or a dolled up trollop. Or on stage one time, he was just like not a nice person to his colleagues. I don't have any specific stories to recall right now. If I looked him up, I could. But generally, he would worship the media. But to anyone else, he was a complete asshole too. I think he was nice to his campaign staffers and to his staff, but it's more to other like colleagues and conservatives are outsiders that he was just an asshole to. Second question: in light of Signalgate, what has been confirmed is what a lot of us has long suspected. Mike Waltz is actually quite dumb. Do you think the quality of our politicians on the right is being degraded because leaders are scared of turning down veterans or special forces? I know it's unpopular to say, and I'm not a veteran. However, many of the veteran politicians in the GOP are unfortunately not very good. We love our vets. We love our vets. But I think the vets we choose generally are not the smart. I mean, not the smartest. I mean, Tom Cotton is pretty smart, and he's an infantry officer. Not very good. Well, domestically, he's pretty good. Horrible foreign policy, but he's decent when it comes to domestic issues. I mean, he's always been strong on immigration and against crime. Most of his domestic priorities have actually been pretty good. It's more foreign policy that he's horrible. He's like John McCain when it comes to foreign policy. But most of the guys you get are just like these, lack of a better term, meathead veterans who are not quite the smart. I mean, there are smart military officers they could get, but we prefer these like combative guys who are just like, I'm going to give them hell in Washington. And then they go there and they don't really know how Washington works, and then they become really bad politicians, or they're just like have a lot of anger problems. I mean, like Dan Crenshaw's not a moron. Well, compared to some of the others, I wouldn't say he's a moron, but the problem is he's just like terrible politically, and he's an asshole like McCain, even probably more of an asshole than McCain. So you do have that. There's the Van Orden Orden. Let me get Derek. I need to get his last name. We're having to do a lot of Orden. Yeah, Derek Orden, who nearly assaulted congressional pages because they were sleeping on the floor. A lot of these guys are probably not the best, but, the fact is if you're like Navy SEAL or you had a combat veteran, that it's rarer now. And if you have that record, it makes you, Republicans just love that. And so we pick those people, but a lot of them, some of the others who are not veterans are also stupid. So you can't, but I think it's more that the veterans get a bigger public image and become more representative of what Republicans are. And thus we stand up for them. I mean, I don't want to give too much shit to Pete Hegseth, and Pete Hegseth is, a double Ivy grad, but I like him simply because he's loyal to Trump, and that makes him better than any others. I think Mike Waltz, I think he's just, he's in a role where he's supposed to be an intellectual. You're supposed to be a thinker, and you're supposed to give advice, and he's not these things. with Hegseth, he's just running the military, and generally, you don't have to be much of a thinker, or you don't have to be an intellectual or thinker of that sort. But a lot of these guys are maybe not. You don't want them so much in the positions of leadership they may be able to get, but due to the fact that they're vets, they're able to get that. Now, Trump is smart. This time he didn't go with generals who are smarter, but they're worse politics and worse priorities that they have than, say, Waltz and Hegseth. So I think they're fine to be politicians and to go to Congress, but you maybe need a limit to how far you want to advance them. That would be my take on that. That's a topic for another longer topic, but that's something I would put in. We have a lot of questions today. I should have probably. Well, I'm just gonna get all through them. We're gonna probably have a lot for Wednesday too. He says there seems to. This is from Arm Day Enjoyer. He said there seems to be a lot of downscaling towards third worldism. Tradcons want subsidized extended families. Euros see themselves as just another people in a global community. Some nationalists see white people as another people to protect Palestinians. Passport bros, world travel types, expats all want to go there. Why is this the case? I think it's just that a lot of people who get into online politics are alienated from the American mainstream, and that makes them sympathize with anyone else who's opposed to the American mainstream, and so they'll find like-minded allies in the third world or elsewhere, and also they have trouble, finding middle-class white women to date and marry, and thus they extol the virtues of Thai women or something. So a lot of that, it's just that a lot of people in online politics are alienated from. And this isn't saying a good or bad thing, because there's a lot of reasons to be alienated from mainstream America when you go out. I mean, if you go out to a mall, you're not going to feel like you're at home. So I understand that, but I also at the times it makes them to support anything that's like owning mainstream America or against it. So they'll then side with it. And he's also wanting a definition of third worldism. One looks and sees it. I think it's just a hostility towards the Western world, and a feeling that the Western world is bad and we need to elevate the non-Western world. I mean, that's the clearest definition I can give of it. And so with Latin America, some of the, when they elect socialists who are strongly anti-America and pro-China and calling for the third world to rise up against white imperialism, that's third worldism. But when they have right-wing governments led by blonde-haired, blue-eyed guys claiming that they're non-white, then that's not third worldism. So they've been pushed into middle-income status, but they still resent the West. So that would be my definition of it. And then he said, second question, what are the long-term consequences of interracial marriage? With all this miscegenation going on, is the end result just a lot more people who look one race but have a certain percentage of something you didn't expect, like 90% white Euro with 10% Asian? I find Chris Rufo's idea of a world where you can't tell what race, ethnicity people are to be unlikely. Yeah, that's going to be unlikely. I mean, I don't think this is the best thing there, but most Americans are still going to look white into the future. Generally, Hapas who are going to reproduce, which, well, some of the guys might have trouble, but we'll see, are probably going to marry other whites, and, they'll look like some of these Asiatic Eastern Europeans, which they'll still be white, but they're like, well, are you? They're not going to look like full-on Anglo-Saxons, and it's even the same with Hispanics. There's going to be like a weird look or a different look to them, but they're still going to come across as looking as white. We're not going to be like Mexico, where, the dominant strand is the Indian, is the indigenous. Or in Brazil, where the dominant strand, is shaping a lot of the racial look is, African, and the local Indians. It's a darker shade. It's going to be a lighter shade, but it's not going to look like. There's going to be fewer blue-eyed people. There's going to be fewer blonde people, but they're still going to look white. Now, how they identify is something to really consider, and that's beyond the scope of this current podcast, but they will look largely white. It's not going to be where they're all some shade of, mocha or something, or something that they're indistinguishable, or they look like mestizos. It's going to be they're primarily look white. There's just going to be some strange features in their eyes. There's going to be fewer blue eyes and some other things. So that is my answer to him. Okay, we're gonna just I'm just gonna try to push through these things. Myopic Eeyore asks, the GOP congressional caucus prompted by your podcast on Tim Alberta's book. What do you think is the percentage of GOP reps and senators who actually support Trump, his agenda? How long will it take to flesh out the strong conservatives Alberta described? I think right now it's probably 90% because politicians, a lot of them don't really have deeply held political views. A lot of them are just caring about what gets them elected and what gets them most power. And thus, in 2017, they thought Trump was a blimp that may hurt their long-term political chances. Now they see Trumpism as the future, so they're all jumping on board. So I would say it's probably 75%. It's most. Senate's a little bit different. Senate, I would say it's probably maybe half. But Senate's a little bit different. But House, it's 3/4. That the only thing they may have problems on is trade because a lot of their constituents prefer free trade over tariffs. But everything else, and some of them have disagreements on foreign policy. But the party's been moving in his direction on foreign policy over years. I mean, majority of Republicans wanted to fund Ukraine, so they're much closer aligned to him now than they were in 2017. And to flesh out the strong conservatives as like House Freedom Caucus of the people who care about budgets and they think this is all the base cares about. I mean, they're already in a weakened position. The House Freedom Caucus is much weaker than in this congressional term than it was in the last, and they're certainly a lot weaker than they were in the 2010s. So it's not so much flushing them out, it's just weakening them, and I think they are in a very weak position right now. Now we'll go to K-Max. K-Max has 2 questions. Scott, when the left feels they have a dunk on us by saying there is no white culture, it does not exist, or can you define it? What? I always have to say, please proofread your questions. Please proofread them. Is the answer mainly harder because of diverse white American interests? Whites in the South versus whites in the New England area. I still feel these overlap more than they do for black or Asian Hispanic interests. But does this question have a good answer? He gave ChatGPT stuff. Whites have culture. You can just see. The thing is, white culture is just generic American culture. And they try to deny that. It's like, Thanksgiving, that's white culture. Celebrating Christmas, that's white culture. July 4th, patriotism. Showing up to work on time. Dressing well. Wearing a button-up. Wearing a suit. That's all white culture. The country club, golf. All that stuff is white culture. So it's, the thing is that we don't see it as white culture. But generic American culture is white culture. And, country music, white culture. Bluegrass, white culture. Heavy metal, white culture. There's a lot of examples of this. So by just saying there's no white culture is more simply just saying that whites don't have a culture in the way that blacks do, that it's like all their cultural expressions are explicitly black, while all our cultural expressions are seen as generic American or generic European. So, and Europe clearly has white culture, but they view it as specifically of a nationality rather than something that all whites share. It's just something reserved for their people. But white culture in American context, which is where it's usually dunked on, it means generic American culture. All the stuff that it means to be American is white culture for the most part. Second question: the insane clown party. Scott, one thing is, I don't want to single out K-Max. You don't have to say my name. You can just say the insane clown party. For some reason, he likes to say the name in the questions, but it's okay. We're going forward. The insane clown party, Boebert, Nancy Mace, and Marjorie Taylor Greene are being discussed less and less since Trump's election. In your view, are they not a detriment to Trump or the momentum right now? Going forward, do you feel they are the reason that college-educated whites seem out of reach for the GOP, especially Ivy League educated whites? Well, I just think, Nancy Mace is getting more attention now. I think it's that just Boebert and Marjorie Taylor Greene realize that that there's no way to distinguish themselves because they have to be fully loyal to Trump. So instead of coming off as firebrand rebels or whatever, they're just simply saluting and doing whatever Trump says. And so it creates less of a reason for them to set themselves out from the pack. They're just standard Trumpists. Well, Nancy Mace is doing a lot of PR stunts and other things to make a name for herself that don't really have anything to do with Trumpism. Are they the detriment to Trump? The reason that college-educated whites seem out of reach for the GOP? I think it's just a general impression of the GOP that there's a type of Jerry Springer-esque aspect to some of the GOP. And also, college-educated whites just view it as low status. And it's also a lot of the college-educated white opposition towards Republicans is driven by women, and women feel that the Democrats are for their interests, and they're the more moral and respectable party, so they stick with the Democrats over that. But they do play a part in alienating college-educated whites. Now for Sharecrop. We have a very long episode today, but it's okay. He said, you wrote on Substack about what the right-wing youth want, and I agree. I'm a 30-year-old boomer like you, but I have some younger siblings who are 18 and 20. They have never once mentioned Reagan, and they don't care about Ned Flanders-style soft Republicans. After being surrounded with identity politics their whole life, they now only care about white culture and history and how it compares to other races. I think our biggest hurdle to keeping the youth is that boomer-con messaging will never give up their holy cow. If we want young people, we need to promise them a future and an identity. Do you think that's the case, and what will happen? J.D. Vance seems to believe in American culture outside the melting pot. Well, I agree with promising them a future and an identity. I think with the ones that are more intellectually inclined, like it seems like your younger siblings, they're much more right-wing. The difference I want to say is that the average Republican voting young person is a FanDuel American, while meanwhile the activist or the one getting involved in movement conservatism and really into politics is like a nationalist, is like a strong right-winger. And they're much more into Trumpism plus. And that's what they want. Stuff about the American culture outside the melting pot, the FanDuel Americans don't give a shit about that. What they simply want is the Republican Party that is not the Longhouse. They do not want to be nagged. They don't want to be castigated. They don't want to feel like this is another girl power expression, which they feel is what the Democrats offer. And the reason why they're turning to the Republicans is they feel the Democrats have been taken over by women, and the Republicans are simply the party opposed to giving complete power to women. So what they want is to have a party that is not, or a political representation that is not nagging them to death and not siding with elements that they oppose. They also want a party that is not fully, that is opposed to BLM and opposed to immigration and to their interests. So I would just say that. I think it's more not falling the traps of certain groups that would want to control the party and direct it in stupid directions, and just presenting itself as a better alternative for young people. He also said, I think young people are very turned off by Insane Clown Party and Tea Party MAGA grannies. All the pathologies of the right. That is true, but a lot of the younger the conspiratorial populism, which is a term I'm gonna start using is also big among young people, but it's being directed in a different way. It's like, coming from Ian Carroll, even a lot of some of the younger guys, or some of a lot of stuff with getting on TikTok. They are sort of into that. They're just not. They really don't like the aesthetics of the insane clown party. But the conspiratorial populism is finding an audience among Gen Zers. So if I did not get to you today, I know that Dollar Bill we did not get to. We will get to him on Wednesday. But if there's anyone else I did not get to, I will get to them on Wednesday. But of course, we have to get to the poster formerly known as Mischhaus, but now he's LK Rurik. He's got 2 questions for today. And we're going to end on this. He says, I want to make a comprehensive list of things that should be disqualifying as a conservative to ever countersignal. So far, I have Anons, white women, video games, alcohol, anime, and colonialism. Thoughts on each present entry and suggestions. Anons, yes, you shouldn't countersignal Anons. There is issues with anonymity, which I will someday write about or do podcast on. But you have to be Anon to do this stuff. And generally, anyone who comes to being anti-Anon, it's a bad sign. White women, we can all admit the problems with white women, but then going full anti-white women is cringe because it then elevates Asian and Hispanic women. Video games, they're a fine hobby. Anyone who's counter-signaling video games is supporting girl power, nagging, and the longhouse. Alcohol, I don't have a problem with. I personally don't have any problems with alcohol, and I think I'm always a little bit suspicious of people who are demanding you shouldn't drink any alcohol. I think it's a personal decision, but if you have alcohol problems and other things, so I would probably not put that on the list, even though I don't personally like people counter-signaling. Anime, well, my audience wants it, so to not counter-signal it, so I'm going to have to agree. But it would be one thing if we could have an honest discussion on anime's influence on the right, but all of our audience is very into anime, and they do not count, and they do not take counter-signaling lightly against it. So it is not wise for influencers to counter-signal anime to upset the audience. Colonialism, I would put that at the top of the list. If you start counter-signaling colonialism, you are cringe and third world coded. I do not like the counter-signaling against colonialism. So I would have to say, if you did a priority list, I would say number 1, colonialism, 2, white women, 3, Anons, 4, video games, 5, anime, 6, alcohol, on a list of that. So I think that's a decent list. 2, what do you think the real explanation for Zoomers' drastically lower rate of alcohol consumption is? I've heard 2 good theories, stunted development and panopticon. The former is self-explanatory, but as a Gen Zer myself, the latter is definitely an oppressive presence. I'm not a teetotaler and find complete abstinence infantile, but I always make sure to drink little enough to not risk actual inebriation. I'm sure you can ascertain more than a few things I like not to be able to say freely in a disinhibited state. Frankly, if I felt I was meaningfully at liberty to, I would drink alcohol at least twice as often as I actually do. Oh, and Donald John Trump gets a pass for the previous comment about teetotaling, of course. I don't know if it's the panopticon. I think that's maybe true for some people that are worried about what happens in it. I do think that like young people, if they get drunk, that we have a more monitored society. I am going to say, I think the monitored society may impact some kids who would want to drink, but they're more responsible. And they're like, oh, what if this goes to TikTok? What if this becomes a video? What if this becomes a Snapchat thing? I don't want to embarrass myself. And I think it's what you do drunk now has a bigger ability to impact your life and embarrass you in a way that it wouldn't have for millennials and Gen Xers. So I think stunted development, I think it's a lot of Zoomers are more risk averse and also they're less socialized. And so with millennials and Gen Xers, they would get into drinking because they would go to parties and they're like, okay, we need to have fun. We're going to drink. Gen Zers aren't going to parties. They're not socializing. So they're not being introduced to alcohol in that way where it becomes the socializing mechanism. The fact is they're not socializing in the first place, so there's less in drive to drink anyway. So I think that becomes a factor in the matter. And so that is it for Highly Respected today. If I did miss your questions, just harass me and I will get to them for Wednesday's mailbag. But that is it for our podcast today. We've got a lot of great content coming up this week, so be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.